the day global trade became a weapon. For decades, the global economy has lived under one dangerous assumption, that trade will always stay separate from war. That even if nations argue, threaten, or posture militarily, the ships will keep sailing, the factories will keep running, the world's supply chains will somehow remain untouched. China's Taiwan wargames are proving that assumption completely wrong, because what Beijing is rehearsing right now is not just a military operation. It is something far more disruptive, far more terrifying. It is the rehearsal of a global economic shutdown. To understand why this matters, you first need to understand one uncomfortable truth. Taiwan is not just an island. It is a choke point. Every single day, massive container ships pass through the waters surrounding Taiwan. These ships carry oil, food, electronics, raw materials, and consumer goods that keep Asia, Europe, and North America functioning. This region is one of the busiest maritime trade corridors on Earth. Disrupt it, even briefly, and the shockwaves travel instantly across the global economy. Now imagine this corridor under constant military pressure. That is exactly what China's wargames are simulating. Unlike past drills, these exercises are no longer symbolic. They include naval blockades, missile launch simulations, airspace closures, cyber warfare tests, and coordinated pressure from multiple directions. In simple terms, China is practicing how to pause the world's economy without firing a single shot at a city. And that is what makes this so dangerous. Because modern warfare is no longer just about tanks and soldiers, it is about systems. Trade systems, energy systems, financial systems, supply chains that are so fragile, so interconnected, that breaking one link causes everything else to collapse. The global trade system was never built to survive a Taiwan crisis. Take semiconductors. Taiwan produces the majority of the world's most advanced chips. These chips power smartphones, cars, medical equipment, military hardware, data centers, and artificial intelligence systems. There is no quick replacement, no backup factory waiting somewhere else. If Taiwan's shipping lanes are disrupted, even without an invasion, chip exports slow down, then factories in Germany stop producing cars, tech companies in the US delay product launches. Prices rise everywhere, inflation spikes, markets panic. And that is just one industry. Oil shipments passing near Taiwan supply energy-hungry economies across East Asia. A blockade, or even a security inspection zone, could drive oil prices through the roof within days. Shipping insurance costs would explode. Companies would reroute vessels, adding weeks of delays and massive costs. Global trade runs on speed and predictability. China's wargames are designed to destroy both. What makes this situation even more alarming is that China doesn't need to invade Taiwan to achieve its goals. That is the old way of thinking. Full invasion would be costly, risky, and unpredictable. Instead, China is testing a far smarter strategy: pressure without war. By conducting frequent, large-scale drills, China normalizes disruption. Shipping companies become nervous. Investors lose confidence. Foreign governments hesitate. Over time, the economic cost piles up not just for Taiwan, but for everyone connected to it. This is economic warfare in slow motion. The world is not ready. Western economies have spent decades outsourcing production to Asia in the name of efficiency. Supply chains were optimized for profit, not resilience. One factory shut down in East Asia can now halt production lines across 3 continents. China knows this. That is why these war games are happening now, not later. The global economy is already fragile. Inflation, debt, energy shortages, and geopolitical tensions have weakened the system. China's drills are stress testing how much pressure the world can handle before something snaps. And every time the drills get bigger, closer, and more aggressive, they send a message: if we want, we can turn global trade into a weapon. The most dangerous part? Markets are beginning to price this risk in quietly. Slowly, insurance premiums rise, shipping routes change, companies start planning exits, capital flows shift. This is how trade systems denied in a single explosion, but through constant uncertainty. Taiwan's skies fill with military aircraft. Its waters fill with warships. The world's cargo ships hesitate. Because no CEO, no insurer, no investor wants to gamble billions of dollars on a region that might shut down overnight. China's war games are not about tomorrow. They are about conditioning the world for a future where disruption is permanent. And once that conditioning is complete, the global trade system as we know it will never recover. Because trust, once broken, is almost impossible to rebuild. The blockade strategy and global panic. If part 1 revealed the stakes, part 2 explains the mechanics. How China's war games around Taiwan are not just rehearsals, they are carefully engineered lessons in economic suffocation. At the heart of this strategy lies the concept of a maritime and air blockade. Think of it like a giant hand hovering over the flow of goods, just barely touching them, but enough to cause chaos. Full-scale invasion isn't required. A partial blockade, punctuated by security drills and no-sail zones, can freeze trade like a fly trapped in amber. Maritime traffic around Taiwan is massive. Container ships, oil tankers, and bulk carriers pass through the Taiwan Strait every hour. About 30% of global shipping containers traverse these waters. Rare earth minerals, electronics, energy supplies, all vital for modern life, depend on these routes. By creating even a temporary military presence in this corridor, China can force delays measured in days, weeks, or even months. Shipping companies don't take risks lightly. During drills in recent years, vessels rerouted hundreds of miles to avoid simulated conflict zones, adding thousands of dollars per day per ship in fuel costs and fees. Multiply this by thousands of ships, and the economic impact grows exponentially. Airspace control is another lever. Taiwan is a hub for regional flights, cargo planes, and even drones that carry sensitive technology components. By practicing air interdiction, China signals that even aerial trade routes can become hazardous. Insurance premiums rise, flight paths are lengthened, and freight schedules crumble. Just as importantly, it sends a chilling psychological message. No route is safe, anywhere near Taiwan. But the blockade strategy isn't only about immediate disruption. It is also about creating uncertainty. Multi. Markets thrive on predictability. Investors rely on stable routes, reliable deliveries, and clear geopolitical signals. Predictability evaporates. That uncertainty alone slows trade and investment heaven before any missile is launched or ship is turned back. Consider energy. Taiwan is not a major oil producer, but its surrounding waters are key transit routes for energy from the Middle East to East Asia. Any blockage, real or threatened, can drive oil prices higher in hours. A spike in energy prices cascades across industries, manufacturing, transportation, and even agriculture. The result? Inflation surges globally, profits shrink, and political tension rises in dependent nations. The semiconductor industry, the crown jewel of Taiwan, is even more vulnerable. Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, TSMC, produces the majority of the world's advanced chips. These chips are not just for phones or computers, they are the backbone of modern weaponry, autonomous vehicles, AI infrastructure, and cloud computing. Interrupt even a single month of production, and supply chains across continents start stalling. Car factories in Germany pause production. Smartphone assembly lines in South Korea halt. Tech launches in the US are delayed. The ripple effect is enormous, and no substitute is readily available. China's strategy also relies on a slow burn approach. It's not about a sudden, catastrophic attack. It is about persistent pressure. Daily drills, incremental escalations, and constant media coverage create an environment where companies, investors, and governments begin to preemptively protect themselves. Ships are rerouted, stockpiles of goods are held back, and contracts are delayed. The result? The global trade system starts to behave as though it has already been disrupted, long before any actual military action. Now let's talk about the US and its allies. Historically, the United States has relied on its naval presence to protect global trade routes and maintain freedom of navigation. But China's modern approach complicates this. A full-scale confrontation risks catastrophic escalation. A partial blockade, accidental missile tests, and coordinated cyber operations put the U.S. in a difficult position. Defend too aggressively and risk war. Remain passive and lose influence over global trade. This uncertainty is exactly what China wants. By blurring the line between peace and war, they force multinational corporations to hedge against risk. Shipping routes become convoluted, insurance premiums spike, and contingency plans dominate corporate strategy. In effect, China weaponizes global supply chains without firing a single shot. Cyber operations amplify this effect. During war games, simulations include attacks on port management systems, shipping logistics software, and even banking networks. Imagine a scenario where cargo manifests are scrambled, vessel tracking systems are hacked, and payment channels disrupted. The resulting confusion slows trade dramatically. Even brief disruptions in ports like Shanghai or Kaohsiung ripple across the world's economy, delaying shipments and raising costs exponentially. Financial markets are the next domino. Investors watch these drills closely. News of increased military activity triggers anxiety in stock, commodity, and currency markets. As global trade slows, earnings forecasts drop, stock values decline, and risk premiums increase. The cost of borrowing rises, credit tightens, and companies start delaying or canceling major projects. In other words, China's drills are preparing the battlefield of the global economy without firing a shot. This leads to what analysts call a slow-motion collapse. Like a sudden financial crisis, this is gradual. Supply chains fragment, prices climb unpredictably. Trust evaporates between trading partners. Companies begin seeking alternatives or shoring production, diversifying suppliers, or stockpiling critical materials. But these measures are costly, and they cannot fully offset the fragility of global trade. The result is permanent structural damage. Small and medium-sized economies are particularly vulnerable. Nations dependent on exports or imports through Taiwan are forced to adjust, often at high cost. Manufacturing delays, fuel price spikes, and logistic bottlenecks create inflation, unemployment, and social unrest. China's war games, therefore, don't just test Taiwan, they stress test the resilience of entire continents. Yet there is an additional, more subtle danger. By conducting these operations repeatedly, China conditions the global economy to expect disruption. Shipping firms, investors, and governments begin to normalize uncertainty. Over time, this can shift the balance of economic power, giving China strategic leverage over trade decisions, technological flows, and regional influence. Essentially, the drills are a masterclass in long-term coercion. The takeaway is clear: Taiwan is not just a geopolitical flashpoint, it is the linchpin of modern global trade. China's war games demonstrate that with precise, repeated pressure, global commerce can be manipulated as a strategic tool. And because the global economy is interconnected, fragile, and heavily optimized for efficiency rather than resilience, the consequences of even minor disruptions can spiral into a crisis that nobody can control. By the end of these exercises, if left unchecked, global markets, supply chains, and trade systems could permanently adapt to a new reality, one in which uncertainty and risk are baked in. That is the terrifying vision that China's Taiwan war games are bringing to life, a world where trade itself becomes a weapon. And no economy, no matter how strong, is immune. Human, political, and economic dominoes. Part 1 and Part 2 outline the stakes and the mechanics. Now, it's time to confront the cascading consequences. Because the real danger of China's Taiwan war games is not just in disrupted shipments or delayed semiconductors, it is in the human, political, and economic dominoes that follow. When trade halts, even partially, lives are affected. Factories grind to a halt. Retail shelves empty. Energy prices soar. For ordinary people, this translates into sudden inflation, scarcity of goods, and increased cost of living. In countries heavily reliant on imports through Taiwan, a partial blockade can trigger food shortages, energy rationing, and spikes in essential commodities. Every small delay or price increase multiplies, affecting millions simultaneously. Consider this: East Asia, Europe, and North America are tightly linked through just-in-time manufacturing. Car assembly plants in Germany rely on components from Taiwan, Japan, and South Korea. Electronics firms in the U.S. depend on chips from TSMC. Even a short-term disruption forces companies to slow production or pause entirely. The ripple effect reaches retail stores, hospitals, and service industries. In essence, trade disruptions quickly become social disruptions. Politically, these disruptions create enormous pressure. Governments face public outrage as prices rise and supply chains falter. Leaders are forced to make difficult choices. Should they risk confrontation with China or accept economic losses? The slow, creeping nature of the crisis makes it harder to respond effectively. Unlike a sudden military invasion, where the world can rally, this is a war by attrition against the global economy. Allies of Taiwan, particularly the United States, Japan, and European nations, are placed in an impossible position. They must balance economic consequences against security obligations. Escalation risks open conflict. Inaction risks permanent damage to trade networks. For multinational corporations, this becomes a question of survival. Stay in Asia and risk disruption, or relocate supply chains at enormous cost with no guarantee of stability elsewhere. The geopolitical ripple is just as significant. Nations that depend heavily on Taiwan for trade are forced into alignment or at least compliance with China's strategic objectives. Over time, China gains leverage not just through military might, but through economic coercion, using trade uncertainty to bend global actors to its will. Countries unwilling to align may find themselves penalized by delays, higher shipping costs, or restricted access to critical goods. Cyber warfare compounds the threat. China's war games increasingly include simulations of cyber attacks targeting port management, shipping logistics, and financial systems. In an age where trade depends on digital infrastructure, a coordinated cyber disruption can freeze commerce just as effectively as a naval blockade. Payment systems can be delayed, cargo manifests altered, and supply schedules disrupted. Cyber attacks magnify uncertainty and accelerate the collapse of confidence in global trade. Meanwhile, financial markets react instantly. Investors anticipate disruptions, pulling capital from vulnerable regions, increasing volatility, and driving down stock prices. Currency fluctuations exacerbate inflation in import-dependent economies. Businesses, facing uncertainty, delay investments, reduce hiring, and cut production. In short, the global economy begins to self-sabotage, reacting preemptively to the potential threat. The semiconductor shortage alone illustrates the scale of this problem. TSMC's advanced chips power everything from smartphones to military hardware. A blockade or prolonged disruption could halt production of consumer electronics, automobiles, and defense systems worldwide. Countries without alternative suppliers face immediate vulnerabilities, while companies scramble to secure scarce components, driving prices up and creating further economic strain. Shipping itself becomes a political tool. By conducting military exercises near trade routes, China forces shipping companies to reroute vessels, often through longer and more expensive paths. This delays deliveries, increases insurance costs, and destabilizes global logistics networks. The mere threat of interference is enough to slow trade. Demonstrating the power of war by intimidation, in economic terms, smaller nations and emerging economies are hit hardest. Countries dependent on imported fuel, food, or medical supplies face shortages that can trigger social unrest. Governments may struggle to maintain public order while balancing diplomatic pressures from larger powers. Aid programs, regional trade agreements, and development projects all become casualties of disrupted trade. These nations are often left with no option but to acquiesce to the new economic realities imposed by China's maneuvers. This domino effect is magnified by interconnected industries. Energy, technology, agriculture, and transportation are tightly linked. A delay in one sector cascades into others. Factories stop, shipping lines falter, and retail shortages appear. Inflation spikes as supply dwindles, social unrest increases, political pressure grows. Global governance bodies, such as the World Trade Organization, are often powerless to intervene quickly. In short, a relatively small military exercise near Taiwan can initiate a systemic global crisis. What is particularly insidious about this strategy is its slow-burn nature. Unlike a traditional war, which is obvious and provokes immediate responses, economic warfare through trade disruption creeps in gradually. Companies and governments are forced to adapt continuously, often too late, and the global economy adjusts to a new norm of uncertainty. Trust between nations, investors, and businesses erodes, making long-term collaboration difficult or impossible. Supply chains, once optimized for efficiency, must now be optimized for risk avoidance, costly and less productive alternative. Additionally, repeated exercises condition global actors to expect disruption as a permanent reality. Shipping companies factor in Taiwan risk into every contract. Investors price in potential blockades, and governments develop contingency plans for trade slowdowns. While this may seem like preparation, it also means the status quo of global trade is fundamentally altered. Even if tensions de-escalate in the future, rebuilding the old system of trust and efficiency will take years, if not decades. China's Taiwan wargames also revealed the vulnerabilities of alliances. Countries relying on U.S. naval protection may find that in a slow-moving economic war, military intervention is delayed or limited, creating a gap between promises and capability. This gap increases uncertainty and encourages nations to pursue independent strategies, further fragmenting the global trade system. Finally, the human toll cannot be overstated. Beyond financial markets and shipping routes, ordinary citizens face the consequences: rising unemployment, scarcity of goods, higher energy costs, and social unrest. The disruption is felt in hospitals, schools, and cities worldwide. Unlike conventional warfare, which is geographically confined, economic warfare extends its reach to every corner of the globe, touching the lives of billions in subtle, devastating ways. The collapse of global trade and what comes next. By now it's clear, China's Taiwan wargames are not just rehearsals, they are a blueprint for economic disruption on a global scale. Parts 1, 2, and 3 revealed the stakes, the mechanics, and the cascading consequences. In this final part, we explore the ultimate scenario, the collapse of the global trade system, its long-term consequences, and the urgent lessons the world must learn. The first and most immediate effect of sustained pressure around Taiwan is systemic gridlock in global logistics. Ships wait outside ports for days, weeks, or even months. Cargo is delayed. Semiconductors, oil, and rare earth materials, the backbone of modern economies, are stuck in limbo. Companies that rely on just-in-time inventory find themselves paralyzed. Factories halt, retailers run out of stock, and consumers face scarcity. Unlike temporary disruptions, these blockades compound over time, creating shortages that feed upon themselves. As supply chains fracture, prices skyrocket. Energy costs, already sensitive to geopolitical tension, spike due to delays in oil and gas shipments. Electronics, automobiles, and medical devices become scarcer, forcing consumers to pay exponentially higher prices. Governments, particularly in import-dependent nations, struggle to stabilize inflation, often resorting to rationing or subsidies. In effect, the cost of living rises dramatically, and the global middle class feels the immediate impact. This scenario also exposes the fragility of financial markets. Investors, seeing delays in rising costs, pull capital from higher-risk regions. Stock prices drop, currency volatility spikes, and credit becomes expensive. Multinational corporations, wary of unpredictable trade, slow investments, or relocate operations entirely. Over time, the global economy enters a slow-motion recession, where growth stalls and unemployment rises, particularly in manufacturing and export-driven economies. Politically, countries are forced into impossible choices. Should they confront China militarily to reopen trade lanes, risking war, or should they comply, sacrificing economic independence? Smaller nations, lacking both military and economic resilience, often acquiesce to Chinese pressure. Larger nations, even when willing to challenge China, face a dilemma. Direct confrontation could escalate into a full-scale conflict, while inaction encourages further disruption. The net result is a global power shift, where economic leverage increasingly favors China, not by force of arms, but by control of trade. The human consequences of this economic warfare are profound. Beyond rising costs, scarcity, and unemployment, entire populations may face critical shortages of essential goods. Hospitals could struggle with delayed medical equipment. Food supply chains might falter, particularly for countries dependent on imported staples. Energy rationing could become necessary in densely populated regions. Social unrest is a predictable outcome when citizens are deprived of basic necessities, and governments are stretched to maintain stability. Yet, even in this scenario of widespread disruption, recovery is possible, but only if global coordination and resilience planning become priorities. Countries may seek to diversify supply chains, build stockpiles of critical materials, or invest in domestic production. Businesses might redesign logistics networks to reduce reliance on choke points like Taiwan. Technology and innovation can help mitigate some vulnerabilities. But rebuilding trust and stability in the global trade system will take years. One crucial lesson from these war games is that preparation matters more than reaction. Nations that recognize the fragility of interconnected trade early have a chance to protect themselves. Multinational corporations that hedge risks, diversify supply sources, invest in logistics resilience can survive, even thrive, in a disrupted global economy. Conversely, those who remain complacent risk catastrophic losses. Another critical takeaway is the role of information and awareness. China's strategy relies heavily on perception. The threat of disruption is as powerful as the disruption itself. By conducting repeated exercises, Beijing sends a signal that uncertainty is permanent. Global actors must understand this strategy to counteract it effectively. Transparency, intelligence sharing, and coordinated policy measures can reduce panic and prevent economic self-sabotage. Ultimately, the collapse of the global trade system is not inevitable, but the risk is real and growing. If nations ignore these warning signs, failure will be measured in months and years, not in days. Trade, finance, and supply chains will adapt to the new normal of disruption. It's fundamentally altering the way economies operate. In this altered reality, speed, efficiency, and predictability are replaced by resilience, redundancy, and risk management. This is not just a shift in economics, it is a shift in global power. For ordinary people watching from afar, the takeaway is simple. The world is more interconnected and more fragile than ever before. Decisions made in the availability of smartphones, and even the jobs people hold. Economic warfare is no longer a distant concept. It is a lived reality, and understanding its mechanisms is the first step toward mitigating its impact. In conclusion, China's Taiwan war games are a wake-up call. They are teaching the world that trade itself can be weaponized, and that global economies, no matter how advanced, are vulnerable to strategic disruption. Supply chains can collapse, markets can panic, and societies can feel the impact almost instantly. Governments, businesses, and individuals must recognize this fragility and take action to protect themselves. As these exercises continue, one thing becomes undeniable. The global trade system will not survive unscathed if the lessons of Taiwan are ignored. Adaptation, diversification, and awareness are no longer optional. They are essential. The question is no longer whether disruption will happen, but when, and how prepared we are when it does. So, if you found this analysis eye-opening, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. By doing so, you'll get more insights into hidden histories, global conflicts, and the forces shaping the future of trade and power. Don't miss out. Hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications to stay ahead of the curve. Because in a world where trade can become a weapon, knowledge is the most valuable currency.